like a bell cut.
Hello and welcome back to the channel where once again it's time for another review in our wrestling game series. Today we're taking a look at the first EA produced WCW game, WCW Mayhem, which saw release in September of 1999 on both the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation before getting a Game Boy Color version in May of the following year. Now, I don't think many people are going to argue with the fact that towards the end of 1999, WCW's quality in terms of the product that they were putting out on TV was diminishing. Quality of the performance of some of the wrestlers as they were getting older, ratings, storylines, everything was in free fall, and it was just losing ground with the WWF more and more as the months went by. But that was reality. This is the world of computer games, and we're going to talk about if WCW Mayhem could potentially improve on WCW NWO Thunder that we'd seen earlier on in the year, and perhaps could it get anywhere close to the quality that we'd seen with WCW NWO Revenge on the Nintendo 64. Like always, we're going to be talking about how it looks, how it sounds, how it plays, content and lifespan, whether it's still worth playing today, and where it could potentially feature in our wrestling game top 10. So once you see the main menu, you'll see you've got a quick start, main event, quest for the best, pay-per-view password, create a wrestler, and global options. Heading into the options, it really is just changing the volume levels for a variety of settings within the game. Now, when you enter the character selection screen, once again, you'll see you've got quite a good, diverse roster. Like I said previously on WCW NWO Thunder, WCW's roster in 1999 was still very strong. They still had all of the main talent that they'd had during their successful period. So you've got a great choice of wrestlers here. There's quite a few unlockable characters as well, so it's pretty good in this regard. Now, with all of this out of the way, we need to go into how this game looks, how it sounds, how it plays, what kind of content and lifespan it's got, and whether it's still worth playing today and where it's going to feature in our wrestling game top 10. So we're going to start out with visuals first, and there are some good things to point out about WCW Mayhem in the visual department, most noticeably the quality of the levels of detail in the characters in terms of the texture work in their actual bodies, their facial details, and all of their outfits. I think they're really good quality, possibly the best that we'd seen on a wrestling game in the PlayStation at this point. As well as that, all the wrestlers have somewhat authentic ring entrances. The first WCW game on the PlayStation for characters to actually walk to the ring. We'd seen a few video clips on previous ones, and WCW vs. the World didn't have anything at all, so that is a welcome addition as well. As well as that, we've had backstage areas added to this game as well, so it does give the game a little bit more visual variety.
Somebody's going to get hurt in there if something's not done. Where's security?
Unfortunately for Mayhem, I feel like the negatives actually outweigh the positives. Starting with the fact the characters have got this slightly squashed, stocky look to them. It kind of makes them all look slightly unnatural, which is a little bit disappointing. There's lots of glitching within the moves as well. Not many of the moves look very well coordinated and put together. They've got this somewhat jilted, stiff look to them. And the fact that there's so many glitches when you pull off the moves, you know, arms going through bodies, and it just doesn't look very well polished. And the game in general just isn't very smooth running, I feel like. They haven't looked at the previous WCW games on the console and improved upon them at all. In fact, I actually highlighted WCW Thunder had well-animated moves that look good. I feel Mayhem's have gone backwards. They now look worse than that game, in my opinion. Although that game was very quick in terms of its performance, I feel everything looked better and smoother on that game, and it's just taken a backward step in Thunder. As well as that, the camera changes angles when you go outside the ring or when you go backstage, and it's not good because the game engine isn't that great to start with. So I feel they should have put a great game engine in place first before trying to go for these sort of cinematic production qualities to make it more exciting, because in all fairness, all it does is detract from the enjoyment of the gameplay. And to cap it all off, the arenas look really bad on this game. There are no fans, they're just flat mushiness in the arenas, and it makes it feel like you're performing in the COVID era with no fans whatsoever. These arenas look, in my opinion, vastly worse than WCW NWO Thunder, which came out 8 months before this game. So overall, in the visuals department and the performance, I feel Mayhem is somewhat of a disappointing experience.
Came out on top. He took more.
So moving on to the sound effects and music next, and you probably could be forgiven for thinking that because the game's got somewhat authentic entrances now, that all the wrestlers would have their actual entrance theme playing whilst they come to the ring. And while some of the wrestlers do have their actual WCW entrance themes, a lot of the wrestlers don't, and they just have generic tunes playing, and it's really, really disappointing. And for me, there's no excuse for this. We've got CD-ROM storage size, which was pretty big. All of the musics were WCW owned, so there's no reason for these other tunes not to be on the game. For example, Bret Hart and Booker T, two of the biggest stars in WCW at the time, do not have their actual ring themes, which is really frustrating, whereas much lower wrestlers down the card like Disco Inferno or even Buff Bagwell, both of those have got their actual tunes. So in this regard, I feel the game is somewhat disappointing. The commentary is reasonably good. I don't think there's any great wrestling games in this era that have great commentary, but this one is by no means the worst. And actually some of Bobby Heenan's slightly witty one-liners aren't too bad, and they're probably the highlight of the commentary, in all fairness. In terms of the sound effects within the matches, they're okay as well. I don't think any wrestling game managed to replicate the sound that WCW ring had, but there's nothing bad here. Nothing is terribly offensive, and it all sounds reasonably good. I do feel the negative, though, is of course the fact that not all the wrestlers have their actual ring themes. But what I will do is give you a few examples of some of the wrestlers that do.
Disco fever, disco fever, disco fever, yeah, 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 yeah. Disco.
So moving on to the gameplay next, and it was Kodiak Interactive that developed this game and EA that published it. And for me, one of the things they should have been doing was taking a look at the previous WCW game on the PlayStation, Thunder, thinking about what the good points of the way that played were and thinking about what the bad points were, and just trying to come up with a better playing experience overall. And to some degree, I think they tried it, and then in others, I think they just completely missed the ball entirely. Now, the main benefit of Mayhem's gameplay, in my opinion, is the fact the more streamlined grapple system. You can initiate a grapple now and then press a direction button with a face button and you will pull off a move, and it is much more simpler and better to do than on the previous WCW games. Unfortunately, the gameplay is just completely clunky and not very fluent, so it just doesn't feel good to do it. It doesn't feel satisfying, in all fairness. One of the niggles as well is the fact that they've still got 3 striking buttons on this game. You only need 1 punch or kick button. You can have a different direction for a different move, and it is much more streamlined, and it frees up the other face buttons for your running and your blocking, your basic functions, and it just would have made the gameplay much more fluent overall. As it is, it's clunky and it's frustrating, and it's somewhat unresponsive as well. You don't really feel like you're in tremendously good control of the wrestlers, and I don't really feel overall it actually plays any better than WCW Thunder that came before it. In terms of your specials though, they're somewhat easier to perform. Once you've got your momentum bar at max, you initiate a grapple, press the square button, and you will do your character's finisher move. Now most characters have a standard grapple move as their finisher, someone like Kevin Nash with the jackknife or DDP with a diamond cutter. These moves can be performed easily. Unfortunately, a wrestler like Hulk Hogan, whose finishing move was the leg drop, it can just be done at any point in the match by pressing a direction and triangle. He will do his leg drop, and it's not really a special. When you actually activate his special move in a grapple, he does a headlock and punches them. And it is very, very demoralizing to build up your finishing bar and then do a headlock and a punch. And it is very, very frustrating. And it is like this for a few other wrestlers as well. Wrestlers like Sting and Bret Hart, whose finishing moves are submission holds, they can just do the moves at any point in the match, so they don't even feel like your special move. And I think, to be honest, that just sums up the gameplay in general for this game. It is just somewhat frustrating, somewhat clunky, not very smooth. And at the end of the day, it's not a fun game to play.
He's looking like that stunned him a bit. German suplex.
So moving on to content and lifespan next, and like I said at the start of the video, there's a reasonably large roster of WCW wrestlers on the game, and there are quite a lot of unlockable characters as well, and this is great because it gives you something to strive for, it gives you content to unlock, and I think that is a fantastic thing to have in wrestling games. Now in terms of the one-player modes, we've got Quick Start, we've got Main Event, we've got Quest for the Best, we've got our pay-per-view password mode, and we've also got a Creator Wrestler. The Quick Start simply lets you select a wrestler and you are pitted in a match against a random opponent. Main Event is your exhibition mode to play, where you can pick from matches like single matches, tag matches, battle royals, three-way dances, and so on. You can adjust the rules so that they can be hardcore, falls count anywhere, those kind of things. So this is where you're going to get the most variety of the gameplay. Now the Quest for the Best is the main one-player mode of the game, where you start off in the television title rankings, you build your way up, win that title, move on to the US title before moving on to the world title. In all fairness, it's very similar to previous WCW modes on the wrestling games that came before it. Apart from it's just putting them all together in one mode where you go after the titles one after another, and it does take quite a long time to do. The downside is, of course, it gets pretty repetitive just having singles match after singles match after singles match with no storyline at all. It's not really a career mode, so to speak. In fact, no WCW wrestling games that ever came out had any kind of story mode or proper career mode in them, and it was pretty much a nail in the coffin for all of those games in terms of their longevity and their one-player appeal. Pay-per-view password was quite an interesting thing, because when the game came out, the company kept giving out passwords that you could put into the game, and it would set up matches that were happening on their TV shows or their pay-per-views, and then you could play through them. So I think that was quite novel, and I think there is a reasonable amount of codes available to look up online to do this. And we've also got a Creator Wrestler, and the Creator Wrestler is actually reasonably good and relatively in-depth. I think it's quite good because you could actually add like tears and rips into the clothing of the wrestlers, so it is quite detailed in that regard. So I've got no complaints in that aspect too. So whilst there's a reasonable amount of content in this game, I feel the lifespan of the game actually isn't very good at all, and that basically comes down to the gameplay being frustrating, irritating, and it just simply brought me no enjoyment to play this game for the hours that I put in to capture the footage and get my experience of the game up to where I felt it should be to bring this review to you. It's just simply not satisfying to play. The glitching in the matches and the way the moves pulls off just adds to the misery. The unresponsiveness and the clunkiness of the game in general is just frustrating, and to add insult to injury, the loading times are very, very frequent and pretty long. Even scrolling from one wrestler to another in the character selection screen results in loading times, and this just makes the game even more irritating. So in terms of its lifespan, I feel after a few matches, the frustration will set in and you will be more than likely turning this game off and not returning to it anytime soon.
Macho Man should be looking for the tag if he ever gets the chance.
So like always, that leaves us with a few final questions. Is WCW Mayhem still worth playing? Where is it going to feature in our PlayStation top 10? And more importantly, where is it going to rank in our wrestling game top 10? Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to tell you Mayhem's not worth playing, in my opinion. It doesn't bring me any enjoyment. I think I've stressed that enough in this video, so I'm not going to recommend you play it, whether it's the PlayStation or the N64 or even the Game Boy version. I wouldn't play any versions of these games. In terms of our PlayStation top 10, I'll quickly tell you it comes in at number 5. The only game I think it's slightly better than is Hardcore 4x4, and that's only because I like wrestling games and it's got some of my favourite wrestlers on the game. Now, more importantly, where does it feature in our wrestling game top 10? Unfortunately, it's not very high in this list either, because I think the only game it's better than is WrestleMania Steel Cage Challenge. I feel all the other games on the list, even WCW NWO Thunder, I feel is a better game than this. I think it's smoother, it performs better, and simply down to the fact that you can get the matches over and done with pretty quick on that game, meaning it's much better in my opinion overall than this. One of the frustrating factors about this game is even if you get your special move bar up quick, hit your finishing move and go for the pin, unless the words finish him are flashing over the screen, your opponent will just kick out and it becomes very frustrating. And sometimes actually matches can take a long time to be victorious in, and that's just another frustrating factor. So that is why it's coming in so low in our wrestling game top 10. Now, like always, these are just my thoughts alone. I think some people actually think this game isn't too bad, but in my opinion, I think it's probably one of the worst wrestling games on the PlayStation. But if your opinions differ, or if they are the same as mine, let me know with a comment down below. And like always, I'll be back in the near future with another wrestling game review. Goodbye for now.